Sashi.
Let's take this out of debate land and into the real world. It is not a case that parents either care about education or about religion. It's both, ladies and gentlemen. All parents who take their kids out of school and put into homeschooling care about their children's education. And we think Cameron's first substantive argument proves that exactly, right? Those are the parents who go and lobby their schools. Right, because they care about their kids' education, ladies and gentlemen. We reject it. What we'd say is that firstly, we think the reason that they take their kids out of homeschooling is because that lobbying has failed. It's because they can't get changes, ladies and gentlemen, in those schools. That's why they pull them out. We don't think it's fair to hold back some kids just to kind of notionally have some slight benefit for everyone else. We think jury duty is completely disanalogous in that you only do it like once in your life, if that, right? So let's move on to look at two things. Firstly, at the role of the government. Secondly, at the terms of choice. Firstly, what we heard was the idea the government has a role to ensure that there is a maximisation in terms of the children's social capacity and in terms of their education, ladies and gentlemen. On both levels, we think it is just not true. Let's look firstly at education, ladies and gentlemen. What we'd say is that ultimately, like the stats bear out, these children do better. Victor gave you that analysis. I'm going to give you some more. In year 12, these children are usually taking like college-level classes. They are far and away the best performers in universities. And why is that? It's because they get one-on-one attention. Like, the biggest push is to get lower student-teacher ratios in all classes, ladies and gentlemen. That's like one of the single most effective ways to teach a child. That is what you have in this case. You have a teacher directly teaching that child, ladies and gentlemen. They told us that they just can't be objective in this kind of case. That the parents can't be objective. We reject this assertion. We'd say that they have a reason to improve their child's education. If they're the ones who are teaching, and they always want to strive to make sure that child does best. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, a teacher in a public school has an incentive to try and raise kind of the weaker students and just make sure that everyone improves. One-on-one means that that teacher is always ensuring that that child does as well as they can. But more broadly, they said we should have equality of opportunity. Fine, you should give everyone the option. But let's take the example of healthcare in the United States. Sure, you have to go to a state provider. But you also have a private option, ladies and gentlemen. You can go and do it yourself if you think that will allow you to do it better. That is exactly what we are providing in this instance, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, moving on to look at civic participation of the government. I said we need this in terms of kind of like the children need to learn and to be able to participate in our democracy. Firstly, we think you can teach that quite easily. Secondly, we question whether people who have gone through a public school system have great reasoning skills, ladies and gentlemen. We point you to the fact that the popularity of things like tabloid newspapers has probably evidence that most public school systems aren't that smart anyway. More importantly, ladies and gentlemen, we think that when you actually have like a one-on-one education, that's when the core stuff gets taught the best. And particularly, we think that when you have a testing mechanism, the parents still have the incentive. Like most of these kids that get homeschooled have an incentive in terms of going through to university and college level to get higher education. As a result, we think parents generally try and provide the best education. Let's move on to look at parental choice. What they told us is that ultimately these parents are either intellectually or religiously motivated. And we have a couple of responses to that. The first was to say it is ultimately about education, that the statistics bear this kind of out. But what we'd say is that it's a good thing if those children have special needs, ladies and gentlemen. It's not just about disabled kids. And in fact, we say disabled parents are crying out for more services in state schools. They just don't get it. But what we'd say, ladies and gentlemen, is that ultimately those kind of special needs kids are the ones who need this, right? If the state can provide it, that's fine. But those aren't the kids that we're concerned about. It's not the kids who can get something from the state provision. It's the kids who can't get what they need from the state system. That's who we're targeting in this debate, ladies and gentlemen. That's who this debate is actually about. It's about those kind of disabled kids who the state won't care about. It's about those kids where the state just doesn't teach you fast enough. If you're so smart that you're ahead of the rest of your classmates, no amount of accelerated learning is actually going to help you. And finally, on this idea that actually the parental choice should be overridden because there's problems in terms of interpersonal mixing. We have a couple of responses to this. We take that the assertion that bullying is necessarily a good thing is wrong for a start. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, again, it's about those cases where it's not effective. Sure, some kids can handle that kind of bullying, but for other kids, the bullying is so bad that it ruins their educational experience. They're the ones we think should get taken out, and that's exactly the point. We'd say, ladies and gentlemen, that moreover, these kids are often more socially well-adjusted. Why is that? It's because these children have been raised in an emotionally safe environment, in an environment where their needs are taken care of, where they have constant attention, where they feel safe safe and they feel well educated. And it's borne out in the statistics. They actually tend to be more involved when they go to university. By a ratio of something like 50 to 60% extra, they are more active in things like extracurricular activities. They're more active in things like charities, in sports, ladies and gentlemen. These are the kids who do the best. Finally, in terms of diversity, we have a couple of responses to this. We reject the idea, and I'm going to look at this in my positive manner, that when you force kids into the education, they will actually mix and will actually be diversity. But secondly, we'd say, that's an argument for banning religious schools, ladies and gentlemen. That's an argument for banning private schools. We allow those because we accept it's not purely about that level of diversity. So in terms of Cameron's material, and I'm going to deal with this in my own positive manner, is how do these parents actually react when you force this change through? So what happens? We think this is seen as an attack, especially on kind of religious groups. We think more generally as an attack on these parents. We think they feel cut off and they feel disengaged in the state. That results in two things. In the best case scenario, we think what they do is undermine state efforts. In the worst case, we think they withdraw entirely. Let's look at the best case scenario. We think, ladies and gentlemen, if you somehow manage to get these kids to school, they will constantly be undermined at home. The state's education system will be undermined at home. Because either we'll have those kind of religious groups and those crazies who will be continually undermining what the state is teaching. They'll be telling their kids that the teacher is stupid, that the curriculum is wrong, you should ignore what is taught. We think that puts the kids in a position where they either ignore what is taught at school, or they're in a position where they are torn between listening to their parents and listening to their teachers. That has harmful educational outcomes. Moreover, they feel persecuted when they go to school. They feel like they're under attack because that's what their parents are telling them. Their parents are telling them that I would love to keep you at home, but the state is forcing me to send you to school. That's when we think, ladies and gentlemen, those kids don't have the incentive to mix with others because they see the school as a fearful, dangerous place. They're going to hang out with people of similar nature. So alternatively, we think the other possibility is the parents don't get involved and engage in the way that Cameron thought that they would. They don't think the state is providing adequate education. They don't go to parent-teacher interviews because they don't think the teacher is going to do anything useful. They don't enforce things like homework because they don't care about what the state is teaching them, ladies and gentlemen. We think these parents are parents who have tried to actually lobby the state and lobby the schools and don't get that. You need parents on board to support education. And if they're not on board, if they're not working with the teacher, then all those benefits that Cameron wanted to talk about just don't come about. But secondly, let's look at the absolute worst case scenario. We think this can happen for the crazies of the religious groups. And that is that they just withdraw from society entirely. When they're afraid of government intervention and persecution, when they're afraid that any interaction with the state will see their kids taken away from them, put in schools, ladies and gentlemen, their minds polluted by like secular filth, that's when they don't interact with the state organs. That's when they're afraid to take their kids to hospitals, to welfare services, ladies and gentlemen, for fear of them being found out of homeschooling. And who lose out, ladies and gentlemen? It's the children, ladies and gentlemen. They're the ones who lose out the most because they don't get access to the state services. At the end of this debate, ladies and gentlemen, what we've told you consistently, educationally, the outcomes are better for children. Socially, the outcomes are better for children. But even under their model, we think none of the benefits come about. There are serious harms. Ladies and gentlemen, won't you please think of the children?